Now, if there's one thing that annoys me more than most, it's when politicians say one thing in opposition and then, of course, become exactly what they criticised as soon as they get to government. It annoys me because, while we all know that a fair share of politicians are liars, willing to do anything to get into power, it annoys me because there are people who actually believe the things that people say in opposition that they will actually fix when it comes to government. We all know that Albanomics is a joke. We all know that the result of it is massive inflation. We all know the Australian dollar is dwindling by the day, which means if you're an exporter, you're getting less money back than you were before. Exports, of course, such an important part of our economy, let alone, of course, the 11 interest rate rises under his watch. One was catastrophic under the previous government, 11, well, nothing to see here. But let's talk about petrol, because right now, the cost of living crisis, the apex of it is petrol. There is not a thing that moves around the country that does not have petrol as part of the blood in the veins of the supply chain, let alone of your family being able to get kids to and from where they need to, or you to and from where you want and deserve to be able to go. Now, petrol, as we know, has already hit over $2, even $2.30 in some parts of the country in the past couple of days. In fact, that $2.30 number comes from Brisbane today. But again, when the Labor Party wanted to make cost of living, one of the reasons why you needed to change the government and put them in charge, because they got it, they understood it. For a long time, they said that petrol was an example of one of those things that needed to be brought under control, that if you voted for them, something good would happen.
The cost of petrol
all around Middle Australia. Petrol prices skyrocketing.
Costs of petrol.
Prices of everything from petrol to groceries going up and up and up.
This election he's lying about petrol prices.
In denial about petrol prices increasing. They haven't done anything about petrol. We'll await to see what they do with regard to petrol. Pensioners in this area have to get in their car. They have to put petrol in their car.
Now, this is not hard to understand. They say the government has a problem when they're in opposition, therefore vote for us and the problem will either be addressed or maybe go away. Remember, when Tony Abbott was talking about stopping the boats, the expectation was that when he was hired as the Prime Minister, he would stop the boats. He wasn't able to take some time off from this policy and hope that the boats would just stop. He had to stop them. And that is exactly what this government has failed to do. They said, vote for us, cost of living. Vote for us, petrol. Well, both have got way worse under this government. And even the point that was made by Anthony Albanese was that the Prime Minister was out of touch because he doesn't have to fill his car. That being the evil Scott Morrison. And back when it was that evil price of $1.79, $2.30 today. $2.30 today. Do you reckon Scott Morrison has been to a petrol station lately? Petrol prices are surging on his watch. Well, what do you reckon Australia can say now that these things are the best part of $2.30? Now, of course, the then federal government made a decision with the money that they had in the lead up to an election to drop the price of petrol. Because just like cigarettes, just like alcohol, there is a special tax that is on top of these things. It's an excise. They decided to cut 25 cents a litre off petrol. The decision would last for 6 months. It would cost the federal budget some $6 billion. And that was the response to, in part, what Anthony Albanese had complained was wildly out of control when it was 50 cents cheaper than it is today on his watch. But of course, petrol right now is, as I say, well over $2. It'll occasionally get mentioned in the news, but where is the same political pressure? Where is any sense of guilt from the same people who said, vote for us and this will get better, that it has got demonstrably worse? To the extent now that petrol is one of the things that is counted in the basket of goods for inflation, that the Reserve Bank then turns around and decides whether it's out of control or not to put up your interest rates. The overall inflation figure has got a 5 in front of it right now, unless it's petrol, and that's 13.9%. Petrol is almost 3 times higher than the average rate of inflation right now. And I tell you what, the stones on the bloke who said, Do you reckon Scott Morrison has been to a petrol station lately on November 16, 2021, when he was confronted by our mate Andrew Clennell about petrol? This was his answer. Oh, how quickly he lost his head in the rarefied air of C1.
Can you tell me what the price of petrol is roughly at the moment?
Oh, the price of, well, I don't go and fill up my car, but it was around about $1.80 last time I did.
Well, it's $2.10, $2.20 now.
Sure.
Is there anything you can do about it?
Well, that's about a global impact.
Rubbish. The Australian federal government has a tax on top of petrol. And yes, the global oil price will go up or go down because we don't refine any of it in Australia. Of course, the reality is that Australia really all we can ever do is decide how much tax we put on top of it. Now, the previous government made a decision. They took it down by 25 cents. That decision, of course, was reversed by this government, and now we're up to 50 cents above where it was at crisis levels at $1.79. It's now $2.30. But guess who today is saying, oh, sorry, there's nothing we can do? Like, even though we have the decision about how much we tax you on your fuel, we are completely powerless here. The same bloke who you just saw over and over and over and over and over again talk about petrol prices before it was his responsibility about how much tax you pay on it.
Prime Minister, will the government consider slashing the fuel excise now that petrol's above $2 a litre?
Well, we don't make tax policy on the run. What we do is we have proper budgets and proper procedures for determining our economic policy.
Seriously. So as a result of the decision to not continue the fuel excise cut, you need to remember this. Every single time you fill up, 25 cents extra is the elbow price that you are paying on your petrol. Now, they are in a position to be able to do something about this tomorrow. They were able to do something about it yesterday, last week, next week, last month, next month. You see, apparently the cost of taking 25 cents a litre off petrol at a time when cost of living is the number one issue in the country, no matter what the media or the politicians try to talk about, is a decision that would cost $3 billion. That is the pricing that was put on it by the current Treasurer. He says we can't possibly afford $3 billion, except they've got $22 billion extra in the budget surplus. Now, should all of that go to cutting fuel taxes? Of course not. Some of it, somehow, somewhere, should eventually start going off on debt, but we all know that that's like spitting in the ocean. But just remember this. They've got $22 billion more than they ever expected for this year. All we're asking for is $3 billion for 6 months. Maybe $6 billion for 12 months. And that still wouldn't even touch the size of the $22 billion extra that they have this year in the real returns from the budget. So make no mistake, petrol is higher under the Albanese government, and it is their choice for it to be higher. The world oil price might be the vast majority of what you pay, but a big chunk on top of it is the tax that they charge, a tax they could afford to offer some relief on. But a choice that they make, which of course is not to do anything at all. These are the same people who took $1,500 away from you as a standard tax return for 10 million Australians. So let's look at the decision-making of this government. $1,500 poorer in terms of cash and 25 cents a litre more expensive when you use that cash to pay for petrol. But again, when they get pushed on this, well, we just get this because apparently this is good enough for the focus groups.
For a lot of Australians who are doing it really tough. Australians are doing it tough enough already. Australians are doing it tough. Reprieve for people who are already doing it tough enough.
And he's the guy who, with this bloke, could make a decision to make petrol cheaper tomorrow. But they don't. Why? I don't know. Because the media will let them get away with it, or because the voting public will let them get away with it? Because the opposition doesn't talk about it enough? I don't know. They choose for petrol to be 25 cents more expensive than it should. $3 billion, $22 billion is how much money they had to play with. And speaking of that fundamental promise that was as rolled gold as stopping the boats, a Labor government will lower the cost of living. Imagine if Tony Abbott had not stopped the boats. They'd still be screaming, even 10 years after the election. Yet nothing to be said about the people who promise the world and deliver nothing. In fact, have made everything worse.